Hey everyone, welcome to a brand new course. Today we're going to be doing Jira for Scrum Masters. And before we get started, I just want to welcome a couple of people here. Well, my little- okay, I'm rewatching myself here, so getting a little bit of an echo. All right. So Powell, thank you for coming. Amanda, for everybody else, we got a few people in the house. So take a second here in the chat. If you can just drop a thumbs up or a hello. I'm very, very excited to get started here. James Heron here. Scrum Master is one of my 1,000 responsibilities. Preach it, man. This is how I feel as well. So this course, I'm going to tell you a little bit about it before we get too far. This is designed to really show you how to harness the power of Jira as a Scrum Master, because your Scrum Master responsibilities, right? We got the whole Agile Manifesto, we got the way of Scrum, right? There's a lot of resources out there already. But when you then take Jira, when you take Jira as a tool, right? It extends the power of Agile, right? It extends the power of Scrum. And Jira is really designed to really allow you to be successful with your Scrum implementations, right? But I don't think there's enough training out there that kind of shows you how to leverage Jira, right? Because there's a technique, there's a way, there's a method to really take advantage of how Jira works, the ins and outs of Jira, and marry those with Scrum. And so in today's course, right, what we're going to be doing over the next 59 minutes or so is I'm going to be showing you how to leverage the power of Jira, the way that I know Jira works to make you, hopefully, fingers crossed, right? That's the intent, to make you a better Scrum Master. So that's what we're going to try to achieve today. Now, a couple warnings. I am still getting over a cough here, so I will be going on mute every once in a while just to not blow your ears out. But hopefully, I can get over this cough sooner rather than later. It's been like 3 weeks now, and it's getting very annoying. So, anyway, thank you all for being here. We got Liz, we got ThinkPad, we got Sherry, Rolanda, Aaron, Mahima, quite a few people. So hello to everybody. Thank you so much for being here. Really, really appreciate it. If you haven't said hi in the chat, please don't be shy. There's like 60 of you in here. Don't be shy at all. I want to see who's in here. So just show some love. Hit that thumbs up or just a little quick hello in the chat. Tell me where you're from. Tell me where you're excited. And we'll get started. All right. So let me share my screen. We're going to have a lot of fun here. Again, if you haven't been to one of my trainings, welcome. We do have some formal introductions here in a second. But use that chat. Let me know where you're tuning in from. And let's get started. All right. So again, this is Jared for Scrum Masters. If you're not a Scrum Master, don't worry. This will be fun. You will learn a lot. If you're like a product owner or some other role, worry not, Commander. This is going to be very, very valuable for you still. You'll at least gain a new perspective. Now, what this course is not designed, right? I'm not going to walk you through the basics of Jira. This assumes, this whole next hour here, it assumes you know Jira already. So we're coming out of the gate swinging hard, right? So we are going to get into it big, okay? We are not spending any time going over what's the board, what's the backlog. This course assumes you know all that stuff already. So with that said, what are we going to be learning, right? So we got, let me go full screen here. We're going to be talking about road mapping. We're going to talk about releases, epics, stories and tasks, backlog refinement, sprint planning, daily scrums, and then completing your sprints. Now, there's a lot of content here. This is the first time I'm teaching it, so it's kind of hard to pace yourself. So hopefully I can get through it all. If not, then we'll have to come back for a part 2. But that's what we're doing. I don't usually stay, by the way, inside these slides. So we are going to be in Jira most of the course. These slides are just a little bit of formality just to keep me on track, just to make sure that I don't deviate too far from the material. But who am I? Why is this guy up here in front of you talking with a little too much energy for 6 a.m. Pacific time here on the West Coast? Well, my name's Alex Ortiz. I am an Atlassian certified professional. I have an ACP 520, and I'm working on getting a couple of more certifications. I am a certified Scrum Master, so I do have my CSM. And aside from certifications, I do have a bachelor's in computer engineering, a master's in systems engineering, and previous life, I also used to have quite a few certifications in cybersecurity. I've been in the Atlassian ecosystem since 2016. I've been teaching people how to use Jira for a while now. And primarily since 2021, I just teach I help people with their Jira problems and or teach people how to use Jira. So spend a lot of time there. Now, if you're looking at me and you're like, I can't quite put my finger on it, but I've seen this guy before. I do run a couple of pretty successful YouTube channels, one bigger than the other. So if you scan that QR code, you're going to see a lot of resources, but we'll focus on the YouTube side of the house right now for a second. So I am Alex from Apex Tech Tutorials, and I have, I don't know, about over 600 videos on how to use Jira. So if you've ever wondered how to use Jira or any Agile type of question, you've probably seen my channel, but scan that QR code, you'll be able to go see my Apex Tech Tutorials and be able to subscribe to that channel. Now here, this channel, we call this the Jira Life. Now this is a community-based channel. So even though it's called the Jira Life, we talk about all things within the Elastic ecosystem, and Agile being a huge part of it too. So if you're new to this channel and you haven't subscribed to the Jira Life, highly recommend you take a second here. Help us out. We are still a growing channel. We're still trying to grow this to something bigger. We are very close to 1,200 subscribers. So hopefully, fingers crossed, by the end of this course, if you all take a second here to smash the subscribe button, maybe we can end this class with at least 1,200 subscribers. So take a second there, subscribe to this channel, the Jira Life. We live stream every single Thursday, which is today at 2 p.m. And we talk to various people from the Elastic ecosystem. So if you're interested in that, make sure you smash the subscribe button now. All right. So with that whole administrative stuff out of the way, let's jump into it, right? Let's start talking about roadmaps. Now, again, this is a brand new course, and we are going to be in Jira, and we're going to start off with roadmaps. And the reason I start off with roadmaps is because as a Scrum Master, you don't get to define the roadmap, right? This is not part of your job, but the roadmap will make your life easier. So I wanted to start off here because as we jump into Jira, I'm going to show you how to leverage the power of roadmaps to really make your life easier, because we're going to take this information, again, work that somebody else does, primarily like a product owner or product managers, if you have those, right? Somebody outside of your role should be determining a roadmap. And the reason this roadmap is important is because it identifies milestones and it identifies high-level priorities. And this is very important because when it comes time to planning your sprint, even refining your sprint, right? It is so important to have a heading, a North Star. And so inside of Jira, which we're going to jump into Jira right now, right? Inside of Jira, we have a couple of ways to do a roadmap, right? We got John Funk. We got a celebrity in the house. Hey, John Funk, thank you so much for being here. Okay. Oh, yeah. And I forgot to mention, before we get too far, if you have any questions at any point throughout this training, do please take advantage of that chat. I have the ability to look at your questions, and I will start them and try to take a second or two here in between breaks to answer your questions. So if you have any questions, please do take a second here, drop them into the chat. We'll be revisiting some of them as I progress through the course. All right, so timelines. Roadmaps. Why are roadmaps important, right? Well, again, as I mentioned, they give you a heading. They give you a sense of direction. Because as a Scrum Master, right, part of your job is to plan what I'll call the perfect sprint. But how do you plan the perfect sprint, right? Well, you need to know what the team wants to achieve, right? And the best way to convey that information is via a roadmap. So I'm going to show you two techniques that I use when I work in conjunction with like my product owners to really figure out this North Star. Where do we want to go? How is life working? Okay. And I'm only going to spend a couple of minutes on this because, again, this is not your responsibility as a Scrum Master, but it's very, very critical to have. So if you're using Jira, there's two ways to create some sort of a roadmap. There's really a third way if you leverage Confluence, and then there's like a fourth way if you leverage plugins, but we're going to try to just keep it within Jira, and I'm just going to show you what's possible in Jira. So everybody that uses Jira, every single person, and I'm going to jump into a better project because I don't like this one. Every single person that uses Jira has the ability to use this timeline, okay? And this timeline allows you to define epics and stories, but most importantly, it allows you to leverage a calendar/timeline view over here on the right-hand side. Now, why this is important is because you can create milestones, which we're going to talk about in a second, and see them on here. So you know where your lines in the sand are. You know when major deliverables have to happen. And this is critical because as a Scrum Master, when you're trying to figure out, again, what should go into a sprint, what needs to be in there, right? Well, these milestones, releases, which again we're going to get into a second, they help charter that discussion, right? Because when you know that you have a looming deadline coming up, right, and you know that, hey, by this date we got to get a lot of stuff done, well, it's easier to work backwards, right? So it's easier to now take, okay, we know everything that's going that way, or at least we know everything that needs to be finished by a certain date. Let's plan our sprint accordingly, right? So this roadmap, again, is very powerful here because it's going to allow us to visualize these vertical lines in the sand that will guide us as Scrum Masters to help make sure we're prioritizing or planning what the right thing is. Now, as I mentioned, this shouldn't be your responsibility, right? But there's a timeline here. You should be working with your product owner, leverage the power of this timeline. Now, if you're fortunate, right, if you have deeper pockets and you got some money, leverage the power of advanced roadmaps. So this takes this little picture that we're looking at on our screen and we put it on steroids. And so I'm just going to open this up over here just to kind of show you this advanced roadmap allows us to not just look at epics and stories, but it allows us to scale bigger, right? If you're a safe team, you're going to love this. If not, then make sure you come back in a week or two. We're going to be doing a dedicated training just for advanced roadmap. So make sure you sign up for that if you haven't already. But anyways, this advanced roadmap here is going to be very powerful because it gives you not just those epics and stories, but also covers like initiatives if you have those, or it even goes down all the way to the subtask level. So you're able to see every issue across the entire hierarchy. Again, this is a premium and enterprise only feature, but you get to see statuses. You can see the assignees of these tasks. You can see the start date, the due date, the release, and you will be able to see the sprint. And so not only can you see the data, but from this particular view, you can also do a lot of planning. So this advanced roadmap, which I'm going to collapse, is very strategic, right? It allows you to define these. Remember earlier we were talking about these vertical lines in the sand, these milestones. It allows you to define these because now that you have a picture, right? Now that you kind of have a general sense of direction, in a couple of minutes when we go into the backlog and we start planning our sprint, right? We're going to be able to leverage this information to make our lives easier. Elena here asks, how do you open the advanced roadmap? So this is a premium and enterprise only feature, but if you have Jira Cloud, should also say this Jira Cloud. I do believe advanced roadmaps, they are on the data center version. They just probably call it something different. But if you're in Jira Cloud Premium or Enterprise, you have a plans here, and you can create a plan. And then I just opened up an existing plan. So that's essentially how we got there. Okay. So those are the plans, right? So again, if you're not leveraging, right, if you're not working with your product owners to have a roadmap, you're messing up step number 0. I'll call it even step 0 as a Scrum Master, right? Because this is a critical thing, right? This roadmap is going to allow us everything that we cover over the next 45 minutes. It's going to let everything else flow better. So I would urge you, I would implore you, spend some time and figure out the roadmapping capabilities, because when you do figure out roadmaps, right, when you have an established roadmap, it makes communication and collaboration across all the stakeholders so much easier and so much better, right? Now, again, this is just a teaser course, right? I can't really cover everything in detail, but do come back in a week or two. I forget when the date is, but I am going to have a dedicated course on how to use the Jira Advanced Roadmaps. I like to call them jars. And so make sure you sign up for that class. All right. So now that we have the roadmaps, let's talk about releases. Okay. Releases is the next big thing that you should know, right? So you saw that I had little circles, right? Little vertical lines that go down, right? And those milestones that I call them, right? They're basically releases in Jira. And so at a minimum, if you don't have the advanced roadmaps, right? If you're not leveraging the advanced roadmaps, that's okay. It's not for everybody. I highly recommend it becomes for everybody. But if you're not using them, and yes, I am trying to get the trend of jar going, right? So if you're not using the advanced roadmaps, again, it is a little bit of an expensive feature. There's other options like Bizer's got a pretty good roadmap. Jexo or now AppFire, they have another good road mapping tool as well. So use some sort of a road mapping tool, right? But if you don't want to do that, you're like, Alex, that's a little too much. We're not quite there yet. At a minimum, I recommend you explore releases. I think releases is very, very critical. It is something that is built into Jira. Everybody has it, and it allows you to, again, set up these lines in the sand, these theoretical like buckets of increments to say, hey, what do we want to do and by when, right? And so in Jira, we're going to jump back into Jira and we're going to talk about this, right? So in Jira, every single project, I'm going to go for this one here. Every single project has a releases section here. And again, I implore you, at a minimum, leverage releases. If you're not leveraging releases today, it's going to be a problem. Okay. Now, your releases give you a couple of things. They allow you to set a start and end date, which again, you can define some boundaries. And depending on your team, you can release every sprint, you can release every day, you can release every month, every quarter, every year, right? Whatever makes sense for you and your company. But the release is going to set up a boundary, right? The release, again, working very similar to how the roadmap works, but the release at a minimum is going to give us these horizontal lines, these imaginary vertical lines on our roadmap that tell us this is the due date. This is what we're promising our customer. This is what we're communicating with our marketing, with everybody else, right? And so these lines become a little bit more like deadlines, right? And so when it comes time, again, in another minute or so, when we jump into the backlog and we're trying to figure out what are we going to, what needs to make it into the sprint, these releases should play a very, very critical role. Because if we are planning to work on a story that's in a release 2 months from now, it would seem silly to be doing that when we have a handful of releases in this that are due like next week that we haven't even started, right? And so again, these releases are going to allow you to really determine this priority, right, of when things should be going out. Now, I'm seeing a lot of chat here in the movement in the chat. So Belinda says, advanced roadmaps is also rebranding. You'll see it referred to as advanced planning on cloud. Oh, that's good to know. I don't like that. I'm gonna have to rebrand my jar, but we'll see. Cynthia Chitra says, in my Jira, I'm not able to see the timeline option. If you're talking about the timeline here, this is something you can turn on and off. So you will have to go to your board settings and make sure timeline is turned on. DC also calls it plans for or portfolio. Yeah. Again, I don't spend a whole lot of time in DC, but thank you, John Funk, for bringing that up. Belinda, once upon a time, it was called portfolio. Yep, that's how I saw it the very first time back in like 2017. If you don't see it, add the board to the project. Yeah, that's another good point here from Aaron. If you don't have a timeline, you also might not have a board, so make sure you have a board. And then in your board settings, I'll just show you real quick. In your board settings, configure board, you do have the option down at the bottom. There's a timeline section. If my Jira were ever to load, there's a timeline and you can turn that on. So if you don't have it, make sure that that's turned on. All right. So, well, how do we work with these releases, right? So creating the releases, again, it shouldn't really be a Scrum Master's role. This shouldn't be part of your job. Just make sure that you're using them. Make sure that you have Scrum releases in there, right? And it's really easy to create them. You just hit the create versions, right? You give it like version 1.0. You give it a couple of dates, right? So I'm just going to go like July 1st through July 26th, and you hit save. And that's one piece, right? So once you do that, if you haven't used releases in the past, this is a little tricky. Atlassian, I don't know if you're gonna Atlassian, if you're gonna be rebranding anything, just figure this releases part out, because once you have this, you can go into your backlog and you can look at an issue. So we'll open this one up, and over here on the right hand side, we have a field called fixed versions. And so if you click on that, you'll be able to select from those releases. And so we have fixed versions, we have versions, we have effects versions, and we have releases, and they all mean almost the exact same thing. We're just going to do that, right? Now, do not confuse the fixed versions with another release that Atlassian has in here. That release singular is usually under development, and that one is for like deployment and CI/CD pipelines from a DevOps perspective. So don't even mess with that one. Okay. So anyways, so the takeaway here is, as a Scrum Master, right, you want to make sure that the stories that you're working on have a fixed version, right? this is going to play a critical role. Now, again, you don't need to necessarily determine the fixed version, but you should work in conjunction with your product owner or whoever is setting up the requirements for you. They should be influencing that release, right? They should be influencing when do they want things done by, right? This is how we communicate expectations. Because as a Scrum Master, think of us as a conductor, right? Us as Scrum Masters, we're the conductor of an orchestra. And these releases are kind of like they're telling us where during the 2 hour or ordeal we want to change songs, right? Like which song are we going to play when, right? Are we changing themes, right? These releases are going to help us as the conductors, help keep us accountable and organized as we lead the rest of the orchestra. So these fixed versions play a critical role. If you're not using fixed versions today, my friends, you are missing out, because again, this is available to everybody. It's not a premium only feature, so everybody can use them, and it's just a really, really easy way to leverage releases. Now, going back to the slides, right? Releases is very, very critical. Just as critical is going to be epics. Now, epics, because this is a Scrum Master course, I'm assuming I'm going to have a little bit more folks in here that are just gun-ho about Agile. And so the stuff I'm going to say here might be a little controversial. I have a very specific take on how I feel about Agile and how I leverage the power of Agile. But something I'm very passionate about is how I leverage the power of epics. Now, in Agile, right? If you're an Agile purist, raise your hand here in the chat. Anybody in here just really, really love Agile, right? If you do, again, just let me know in the chat here. But epics are so much more than what Agile tells us they are, right? Agile just says, hey, your epics are this just really, really big story, right? And you're supposed to decompose these epics down. But Jira loves epics, in my opinion, right? Epics are so fundamental to not just these big stories, right? Which they are, but they help organize you. They help categorize the work, right? And they're very, very powerful, right? They allow you to really help structure your plans, right? They help structure what it is you want to deliver. So let's jump back into Jira here. John Funk, yeah, we definitely have a lot of folks that are like really, really passionate about Agile and Jira, and so I'm going to try not to upset too many people, right? But again, I have a very particular take on how I do epics. So why do I like epics so much? Let's really get into the meat here, right? So when we go into our timeline, right, and we have these epics here, this is really powerful, right? And I'm actually going to switch projects here. I'm going to go to another project. I'm actually going to leave Jira for a little bit here. I'm going to go to a different Jira. And I have this ATEC ARN demo, right? And I have a timeline here. And in this timeline, I have my epics, okay? And these epics, right, as you can see, I have epics here, and I have a release, an e-commerce MVP, and I have a bunch of stories, right? Some of them are done, some of them are in progress, right? I have a lot of work that needs to be done, okay? And epics here allow us to, as you can see, create this pretty cool looking view that we can see not only the status of this capability, right? I like to treat my epics as like capabilities, features, functionalities, big, heavy hitting items that your customers are going to want to see, right? Or your customers are going to want to know. Juan, slides will not be shared mainly because this is all in Jira. So the slides are really just there to help me make sure I don't go on tangents, because if you've ever seen any of my videos, you know that I go on tangents from time to time. So the slides are purely just there to keep me in line. You got to be watching and you got to be following along in Jira to really get the value here. Okay. So anyways, so we got our epics, and as you can see, I can organize things. I can see the progress. I can see how far along we are towards delivering this feature, this capability, functionality, right? And yeah, they're very powerful, right? I love them. You can assign them to people. Because of the way Jira works, your epics can have independent workflows. So epics are usually more prone to like discoverability. They're usually more prone to like decomposition, right? Like you want to break down those epics into stories. And so you are allowed to create specialized workflows for your epics that foster that brainstorming, that discoverability, that research, right? That decomposition. And so it allows you to start top down, right? Because if you remember, we're doing roadmaps, right? We're starting with the North Star, this big thing. Like, what do we want to do as a company? And the epics is the first layer of defense that you can go, okay, we know we want to build an e-commerce website, right? So what about it? What about this e-commerce MVP do we want, right? Well, we know we have a release. We know we want to deliver some sort of an e-commerce website in this example. And as part of this minimal viable product, we have determined that these 5 epics here, 1, 2, 3, 4, yeah, five epics or so. I can't count in public. Yes, 5 epics. These are the epics. These are the ones that we want to make sure go out in this release, right? So the dates, right? If we were to have dates, they would look like this, right? If we were to have this timeline, and we can have stuff like this that basically allows us to again create this roadmap with these releases, right? And we're kind of putting it all together, but we're allowed to break these things down into stories that we now then use to plan into our sprint. Now, what I'm going to do to make this a little bit easier on us, right? I'm going to create a version 1.0 here, and this release is going to be in the future, right? This release is going to start on the 9th of July, and it's going to go through August 9th, a whole month, right? And as you can see, I have 2 releases here. And then the other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create another epic, right? Credit card processing, right? Again, I'm just throwing words out here, folks. Do not do as I say, not as I do, right? Because then you want to create good stories in here, right? Capture credit card info, right? Validate credit card info, charge credit card, right? These are all going to be stories. But what I want to do here, the emphasis of why I'm doing this is, as I have these epics, I want to go to my fixed version as we described earlier, but I don't want to put them in my MVP. These are not for my MVP. These are for my version 1. These are not making it into the first version. At a minimum, you want to put your epic into that fixed version, but you, through some automation or just manually, you can open up all the stories and also put them in the appropriate release that they should be in. Now, keep in mind that if I do this, you are allowed to like cherry pick stuff, right? Like you are allowed to, just because the epic is in one fixed version doesn't mean every story needs to be in that fixed version. You can pick and choose and organize this however, whatever makes sense for you and your teams, right? So powerful stuff there. But once we have this, right? Once we have a bunch of epics and a bunch of stories, we have our roadmaps, we have our timelines. Now we can go into our backlog. Now, as you can see here, I am inside of a Kanban board. And I did this intentionally because what I'm about to show you will not work in a Kanban board. So if you see Kanban like this, you're going to be a little handicapped. You really want to be, everything we're going to be discussing here, the last 30 minutes of this class, really you want to be in a Scrum board. So how do we create a Scrum board, right? And so I want to take this time here to show you how to create a board. You want to make sure you pick Scrum. Again, this technically can work for Kanban, but Kanban's a lot more loosey-goosey, if you will, and it doesn't require as much discipline. Scrum, everything we're going to do right, like from this moment forward, is very disciplined, right? There's a lot of rigor here. So we want to make sure we're in a Scrum board, right? So I'm just going to call this like ARN Scrum, and I'm going to put it in this AAD project. Okay. Now that we have our Scrum board, we have our timeline. So everything that we had our timeline is still there. Awesome, perfect, right? But most importantly, we now have this backlog, okay? And this is where we can start getting into refinement. So when you are looking at your backlog, right? Your backlog is your laundry list of work that needs to get done. This is like, sometimes this is where things go to die. I call it a graveyard. I like to tell people that it's that closet that when people come visit you, you shove everything into your closet. Like that's what the backlog is for me, right? But we got to tame it, right? We got to make sense of our backlog. And I only have 14 issues, but in a real world scenario, you probably have 200, 500, 600 issues. You have a lot of issues, right? And so it can be very, very overwhelming to be looking at your backlog. Now, before we get too far, Sharon calls it an icebox. Let's see what we got here. We got a couple of questions, so let's go back and answer some. So Valeria Alvarez says, I'm not able to see releases option in my project. So that's also a feature. So if you can't see releases, you can go to project settings, and there's a feature section here. And so you want to make sure you turn on releases. So you want to make sure this slider is turned on. So that's how you do that one, Valeria. Malik says releases are very important. It gives you all the releases in one place, relevant task release. You can also compare. Yes. So Malik, very, very important. We're going to talk about that hopefully in a second if I don't run out of time. But this is one of the reasons. This is one of the benefits of using releases is you get release notes. Okay. So we good point there. As we scroll down, we got another question here. I see Epic in Jira, but do not see features capabilities. Please guide us on how to create a feature. Yeah, so if you are on Jira Premium and or Enterprise, and this is a little out of scope of here, so I'm just going to do a quick honorable mention, right? If you're on Premium or Enterprise versions of Jira, you're allowed to manipulate your timeline. Scratch that. You're allowed to manipulate your hierarchy. And what I mean by that is you can rename your epic to be the feature, and then you could create a new issue type called epic and pop that on top of the epic. Now, if you are not on premium, I just like to think of my epic as my feature, right? So I'm just doing like a mental model here for myself. But if you really were wanting to be more like a safe organization and you want to stick that feature in between that epic, it is possible now. I don't have any dedicated videos for that yet. This is a newer capability, but it is something you can do. So you, as a Jira admin, you should be able to rename your epic to be a feature and then go in and recreate a new epic and then set up your hierarchy correctly. So it is possible. Let's see. Powell says, does anyone know the format of stories as a person? Yes. So I do have, so if you looked at my other time, I do looked at these, we were following the timeline a little bit more. But just in the interest of time, I just wanted to create some work and just stick it in there. So didn't want to follow all the formalities. But anyways, that's what's going on there. How specific is the the project type that you have to choose? So great question. Great question. When you create a new project, you're going to be asked by Atlassian. Let me go over here. Do you want Kanban? Do you want Scrum? I should also note that in order to do this, everything we're doing here, you need to be in a Scrum project. None of the other ones are going to work. Now, the project itself is a little less relevant. When you pick Kanban or Scrum here, what's going on under the hood? And Atlassian, it kills me that they haven't updated their freaking UI, right? But when you pick Kanban, you're gonna get these issue types, which are the same from Scrum, but your workflow is going to be different. The workflow for Kanban is not what Atlassian has here. This is fake news, guys. This is not what you get. When you pick a Kanban project template, the issue types that your project ships with, the statuses that your Kanban project ships with is backlog, selected for development, in progress, and done. This is critical. You need those 4 statuses for Kanban to work correctly. When you pick Scrum, you will only get to do, in progress, and done. And this is critical as well because Scrum needs these 3 statuses to work correctly. And I would love it if Atlassian would fix their UI so that this is correct, because this is not the workflow you get when you pick Kanban. So that's the main difference, right? So when you are picking, right, when you're picking the differences between the types, you're really picking the workflow, right? There is a difference. Even though this UI is lying to you and telling you that it's the exact same workflow, it is not. You have 2 completely different workflows. And when you're using Kanban in Jira and you enable the backlog, moving items from the backlog to your board is a transition. You transition something from the status of backlog and you transition it to selected for development. Then it shows up on your board, right? Or if you don't have a dedicated backlog, you'll just see everything. So you have backlog, selected for development, so on and so on, right? But in Scrum, inside of our Scrum projects, we don't care about the backlog status. We get the backlog for free. And when we plan a sprint, which is what we're going to do here in a minute, we don't transition an issue from the backlog into the sprint, but rather we edit the sprint field and we append the sprint value to that field, but the status stays exactly the same, which is not how Kanban works. So there's kind of my, I don't know, Mahima, thank you so much for taking me down this rabbit hole. There should be a bug bounty. I've been telling Atlassian for the longest time that they got to fix that documentation because it leads people down the wrong path. And there's so much confusion there. Anyways, refinement. So in this backlog view, this is where you got to start now figuring out what are we working on, right? What's important for us to work on? And if you recall from earlier, as we're doing our road mapping, right? I'm going to show my versions. I'm going to show my versions panel over here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab a bunch of my stuff here. I'm just going to drop them into this release, right? And this is important, right? I'm just going to randomly do things here. I'm just going to do kind of like a little very random pattern of just like, I want to show you, right? Obviously, you would put a lot of thought into this. But I want to show you this because when you're looking at your backlog, you'll notice that we can visualize that release. Another thing that we can visualize is our epic. So I highly recommend you change the colors of your epics. I highly recommend you go in here. You don't have a lot of colors, so take advantage of the fact that you have, I don't know, maybe a dozen or so colors, and change the colors of your epic so that when you're looking at your backlog, it's a little bit easier to identify the work that you got going on here, right? Because if everything's the same color, it's cool, it'll work, but Jira gets a little bit more interesting when you take advantage of the little bit of color that it gives us, right? And so here we now have our epics. So as you can see, I have a lot of epics in here, right? Now it's a little bit easier to tell which issue belongs to which release, right here in the gray. And we're able to see which epic it belongs to. And these two play a critical role, right? Because when you're refining, when you're grooming your backlog, right? It doesn't make sense for me to be refining this charged credit card that's an epic and a version that's way into the future. It makes more sense for me to be grooming and refining things that are immediately in need, right? And again, you could, depending on time, you should do your immediates, but then later you can do, right? If you want to be proactive, you can go and start doing others farther down the future, right? But when you have your versions and your epics, it's easy for me to say, hey, e-commerce MVP, because I know my roadmap, that's coming up soon. So I can click on that, and guess what? Now we can see all the issues that are for this e-commerce. Then our product owner can say, hey, folks, out of all the epics, product details is the most important epic that you got that we need, the most critical functionality, right? You're like, cool. So now we can, leveraging the power of rank, move that story up, because this story belongs to this particular epic that we know is very, very critical. It's important, right? So we can move that up, and we can move our stories around so that they're in a better order relative to not only the release, but also the epic. And you can start leveraging the power of releases, the power of epics, the power of priorities. So we have a priority field, right? Because when we look at these two stories here, we know that they're important because they're in the next release, where they're in a prioritized epic, but we can also prioritize this way and say, hey, this story is more important than this other story. And so we can move them around relative to this priority over here. So you can leverage these three values to help you kind of organize your backlog a little bit better. So when we don't have any filters and we're just looking at everything, we can see that our backlog is a little bit in better order, right? And so we got a question here. Oops. What are your thoughts? What are your thoughts on who manages the Jira board? We seem to have pushback between Scrum Master and Product Owner. Great question. So my answer would be, who puts things in, right? Who creates this should be the Product Owner or the person that creates that requirement, right? Who manages it, right? Who's the conductor? That's the Scrum Master, right? Your Scrum Master is the person that should really be in collaboration, right? This is not siloed type of work here, right? But your Scrum Master is really the person who's driving the ship. You're just being told what to do, when to do it. But yeah, it is a collaborative effort, right? It's not just, it doesn't fall under one person. But what you don't want everybody with their hands on the wheel, because if everybody has their hands on the wheel, your ship's not going to go anywhere, right? So you want one person in command driving. I think my opinion should be the Scrum Master, but you're getting signals from a lot of different stakeholders, right? To kind of make sure you're making the best decision as a team. Yeah, this is a huge water bottle, Nicola. I'm trying to not let this cough take me down. So we shall see. And I'm also trying not to blow your ears up. All right. So now that we have this information, right? Now that we know this order, right? Now we can go in and refine, right? We can start here. Make sure you have your acceptance criteria. Make sure you have good descriptions. Make sure your team's good with it, right? If it needs to be broken down into subtasks, that's when you do that now. If this needs to be split into additional stories, we can right-click from here, split the issue, right? Make a different story, right? So this is the chance now that we now have kind of like our North Star, and we're like, okay, this is the important stuff that we want to work on. Stuff at the bottom of the backlog, not as important, right? Then you can start going through all your refinement process, right? So this makes it a little bit easier though, right? Because again, we're refining, we know exactly what needs to be refined because of that roadmap, because of those timelines, because of the epics, because of those releases, because of this priority field, we can start taking smarter actions, okay? Smarter actions. So that is the grooming, refinement, ranking, right, that you do in the backlog. Again, this is a sped up version, right? Obviously, you're gonna have a lot more conversations, but I only have an hour to teach you how to use Jira as a Scrum Master. So once you have that, then comes sprint planning. So you create a sprint, right? And in my opinion, sprint planning should be a lot easier if you did everything I just discussed ahead of time, right? What you do not want to do is you don't want to show up to sprint planning to have these conversations, to have these negotiations. You want to get to sprint planning to essentially take the top few items from your backlog and move them into your sprint. And so there's a lot of different methods and techniques here as well. So I'm just going to show you kind of what I do, right? But obviously, when you come into the sprint planning, you should have some understanding of what your capacity is, right? This is going to play a critical role in how much work is enough work, right? And so you should have a good indicator for your capacity there, right? But once you have your sprint planning, right, all you got to do is essentially grab this item and you move it, drag and drop into your sprint, right? It's if you did your homework correctly, this backlog is going to be in the right order. The most important stuff, because you have ranking enabled, will be at the top, right? So you can drag and drop like this, or you can right click and move to the sprint. And in fact, I believe you can do a couple of them now. This is the newer feature. You can do this selection here, and you should be able to drag and drop, or again, you can right click. Oops, you can right click and move a few at a time into the sprint. So last thing, you don't always make mistakes, right? This is a really cool functionality that probably came out like, I don't know, 5-6 months ago. I really like that capability. So anyways, so we're planning our sprint, right? Now, how do we know we hit capacity, right? So this is kind of where some teams get divided. So I'm going to show you what I do here. So during my sprint planning sessions, I like to estimate, right? So what you should not do, you should never hit the start sprint button. Again, if you're taking notes at home, you should never hit the start sprint button without estimating your work. Whether you're using story points or you're using original estimates, you should always estimate your work, because if you don't, then the reports and all the other capabilities of Jira, they don't work so well, right? You're going to have a lot of blank reports and a lot of not good data. So during your sprint planning, one of your goals should be have your team estimate. Now, there's a couple of different ways to do this, right? You can do like your sprint planning poker. I'm a fan of assigning the work. I know Scrum says don't assign your work. You have these self-organizing teams. I've never, in my 14-year career, never have I seen a self-organizing team that is effective. So I always like to estimate the work and assign the work. And when you do that, when you estimate your work and assign it, watch what happens. This is interesting, right? So I'm just going to randomly put some points, right? And I like using Fibonacci. So 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 20, 13, 21, right? I'm just going to put a couple of points here and a couple of red flags for you, right? So if your team is hitting you with a 13, If your team's hitting you with the 13, folks, that is a story that you want to go revisit. Anytime that you're in double digits, if you're using Fibonacci, uh, that. These are red flags for me, right? If your team's hitting you with like a 21, anything like high numbers, folks, you gotta. These are recipes for disaster. Challenge your team, break it down. Smaller is always better. Invest. There's a principle of invest for your stories. Follow that, right? Ideally, I like to keep my stories in the low numbers. So I like my onesie, twosies, threesies, fives. Fives is borderline for me. I'm pushing back at a five. Again, it's all relative. It's all relative to what the numbers mean to you. But the lower the number, usually the higher success. From my experience, the higher the number, your developers throwing you the biggest number they can give to you so that they can basically figure it out over the sprint, right? And that's not a situation you want to put your developers in, because if they're figuring out during the sprint, they're probably going to use that sprint as their discovery, and then it's going to definitely roll to the next sprint where they're then going to, now they made the discovery, now they can fix it in the next sprint, and it's just a bad, it's just not good, right? So anyway, so this is a minimum, right? So just estimating your work is a minimum requirement here, because what you get is you'll get the total number of estimated points, and you'll see this bubble is in the blue. Ideally, your status should all be in like to do, right? They should be gray because you haven't started the progress yet. So I'm just going to switch them all back to backlog here, right? And so we have them in 48 in the gray to do category, right? But if you assign your stories to people, watch what happens. This is my favorite part, right? If you do that, you'll notice that you get the UI expanded. It's very subtle, very, very subtle, but the UI expands and you get this little bubble. And obviously, I only have one person, me, but if you have your whole team, you're gonna have a lot of bubbles, right? One for each team member. But more importantly, you get these three little dots here. And when you click on these three little dots, you're able to see the distribution. So you can now cross-reference this with your pre-agreed upon capacity and see, are we close or are we not, right? Because if you're not, if you're over-tasking someone, that's a recipe for disaster. And if you're under-tasking someone, well, that's also not good news either. So this view here will allow you to basically see, are we on track or not, right? Or are we going to be close, right? And if you don't assign, you don't get this feature. So this is, again, where if you're an Agile purist, you probably hate this. But if you're a Jira wannabe effective purist, you're going to love this. So maybe I'm making up my own words. I don't believe this is part of a team managed projects. Anusha, great question. So, a great observation. I don't do team managed projects. Team managed projects to me are having a Ferrari and sticking a Corolla's engine in it. It's you're handicapping Jira. I only exclusively use company managed projects. I'm paying. I'm paying for this. I'm paying for all the features of Jira. I want to be able to use all the features of Jira. So I don't do team managed projects, and that's a hill I'm willing to die on. But apparently, according to the crazy old man, you are correct. Belinda says definitely worth playing, as you can rate it from 1 to 5 on an impact. Yep. Okay. The Sharon says, shouldn't the team be self-organizing and swarm? Again, yes, they should. I just, in my 14 years of working with hundreds and hundreds of teams, not once have I seen a team be so proactive that they want to swarm. So I definitely think maybe the Scrum folks were onto there must have been on something, because, or maybe I've just been on horrible teams. I don't know. I just never seen it. These are just personal observations, folks. Yeah, don't throw. Yeah, I drive a Corolla too, so this is why I'm allowed to throw shade, Dr. Valerie. So this is why I do that. Yeah, this is where Collides with Jira started using a bug tracking tool where assignings were given. Yeah. So again, Jira, this is the Jira feature. If you want to use it, you need to assign. If you don't feel comfortable with assignment, don't complain later when you can't figure out how your capacity is doing, right? So anyways, that's that take there. Again, a little bit more controversial, but just letting you know. Okay, so we got 10 minutes, so we want to power through this, right? So we got our backlogs. We got our backlog refined. We got our sprint plan. We now hit the start sprint button. We give it dates, right? We give it our sprint goal. We hit start, and we're off to the races. okay, we can now essentially execute on our sprint. So this is where you as a Scrum Master, couple of gotchas, couple of things you got to know. Number one, when you're running your daily Scrum, have Jira open. Why? You may ask. Well, a couple of reasons, right? You don't have to, but that implies that you have really, really good memory. But if you don't have really good memory like me, because I don't, I like to have Jira open, and you just got to get fast, right? You got to learn how to click places quicker, right? It makes life a little bit easier. But anyways, assuming that you have Jira open, I want to give you 3 takeaways here. Number one, listen for what your team is saying, because there's 2 scenarios that are catastrophic to a sprint. Number one, if your team member is like, hey, today I am working on ending world hunger. You're like, awesome, great effort. Where's your story for that? And so it is very common for your team to ignore the plan, ignore the stories in your sprint, and they will go in and do whatever they want to do. And so that's dangerous, because if they go do whatever they want to do, they're not going to be doing the things that we planned, that we put so much effort into, right? And the things on your roadmap and everything else, it all starts to slide. It all starts to not be met. So you want to be making sure that your team is not doing that. You want to be listening. And when they talk, I almost like to go, hey, what story was that? Because I don't see that story. The opposite is also true, right? If I got Rob on my team here, and he's like, hey, I finished the user can view the detailed information about the product. I finished it. It's polished. I got the UX done. Everything is good to go. It's been QA'd. It's been peer reviewed. Branches have been merged. You're like, that's exciting. Why is it still in to do? Right? And so you want to be listening for that as well, because a lot of people would be like, they're going to go make progress, right? They're going to go forth and be very productive, but Jira is going to get forgotten by the wayside. And that doesn't help anybody else either. So you want to be listening for that as well. How do we earn a CEU? I need to figure out how I can become a CEU instructor. That's what I got to figure out, Sean. Okay. I do believe that through maybe, I'm not sure. I guess I have to check with Atlassian, but I'm pretty sure if you came in through the learning portal here through Bevy, through Atlassian's online learning, you might get credit, but I have to ask. Okay, so listen for those 2 things. Number 3, come to this ellipses here, configure your board, and under card layout, there is a days and columns. Turn that on. If you turn that on, if you do this, again, board settings, card layout, days and columns, turn that on, what you will get is you're going to get little dots, little circles that populate right around here. And they're going to tell you how long an issue has been in this particular status. This is something you want to be listening for as well, or watching for, because this will give you a warning of a story being stuck in a status, and your team's either not making progress on it because they're actually stuck, or they just haven't updated their Jira issues. So you want to be looking at this little thing. Now, let me see if I can switch over to another project that might have it. Actually, let me see this all in prep one over here. Let me turn these on, because this is an older board, right? The issues that we were looking at right now were very new, right? But if I turn on this days and column here, you'll see these little dots here. There we go. Perfect example, right? And if you hover over them, they'll tell you how many days this particular issue has been in this particular status. And as you can see, 201 days in this column, probably not going to get done. So those are the things that, as a Scrum Master, you want to be leveraging this to help nudge your team to make progress. Otherwise, things just get stuck. So be on the hunt and the prowl for that. All right. And so as we go down, executing the Scrum, so completing your sprint. So when we're ready to complete our sprint, and wow, this timing, I can't believe I actually got this timing somewhat good. All right. So as we get ready to complete our sprint, right, the only objective that your team has, and I'm going to switch back over to my other project, the only objective your team has is to take the items from the left and move them to the right, right? And so this is probably a realistic representation of what a typical sprint will look like, right? And a couple of gotchas here, again, as a Scrum Master, what can you do here? Number one, you only get credit. Jira only gives you credit if you move something to the farthest right column. It doesn't have to be the done status, but it does need to be whatever statuses you have on the farthest right column. So when you move something there, Jira is going to go, good job, right? And reward you handsomely by giving you a burn down on your report. Anything that's to do in progress will roll over to the next sprint, or you will have the option to move it to the top of your backlog, right? In your retrospectives, you want to figure out what happened, right? You want to figure out why these items got stuck. Now, by pure serendipity, by pure luck, these items were the big pointer ones. Remember, I told you at the beginning, the big pointer items are typically going to get stuck, right? They're just so big. Your team's hiding behind this really big number, and they're going to go and investigate. They're going to go figure out. They're going to go figure out what, like, how to solve this problem, right? And so this is pretty realistic, right? So you want to, as a Scrum Master, you want to be listening. You want to be very proactive, right? During sprint execution, your job is to help lead that team, right? Help unblock them, help be their like cheerleader type of thing, right? And so you can do that by watching and observing Jira and the behavior, doing all the stuff I just told you, and just helping them make progress. In this particular case, when we get to the end of the sprint, you have really two options. You either accept the fact that these items are going to roll to the next sprint, not healthy, or you can split your stories, right? So maybe there's all kinds of beliefs around this as well, right? But Jira, I will tell you, right, this is not a personal belief of mine. I'm a belief of getting ahead of the problem, which is make your story smaller at the beginning so you avoid these problems. But if you absolutely get to this problem, right, you can, as an option, roll your story over 2, 3, 4, 6 sprints into the future, right? Like your team's just going to continuously roll that story over. My preference is to go back to your backlog, find that 21 pointer, and split the issue. Take credit for what got finished, and then make and be more disciplined and make better stories that can then be more strategically planned in the future. Okay, that would be my preference. But anyway, so once you get to the end of this, once you get to the end of your sprint, right, and you split it, you do whatever you're gonna do, you can just hit your complete sprint button. Again, this is where Jira is gonna go. Do we roll to the next sprint or do we go to the backlog? Most teams usually roll. We're a bunch of rollers here, and then you can start your retrospective. So you can do a whiteboard, or you can just do a traditional Confluence page retrospective. Highly recommend you try out the whiteboard one if you haven't already, and then you can go into your space and go do that. So then you can go do your retrospective, and then that's it. Then you're pretty much done. As a Scrum Master, you rinse and repeat. You rinse and repeat, and you just do it over and over and over and over until the end of time. So anyway, before we all drop off here, I do want to take you, how do we take our skills to the next level? So make sure you follow me on LinkedIn. If you're going to do that, make sure you let me know you came from this course, because I get all kinds of requests all the time, and I don't accept a lot of requests from a lot of people. So make sure you tell me that you took this course here and that you're coming from this course, so that that I can accept. Second, we do have a membership here on the Jira Life. So you enjoyed this content and you want to help, support the channel. It is growing. So become a member. We have a lot of different tiers, and we would appreciate your support. So make sure you scan that QR code there and become a member. Discover my other free courses. So I do have other free courses completely free over on Salto. And then I do have a paid course that is Jira Fundamentals. I am working, as of right now, I am working on a 4-6 hour version of this course that takes you deeper into each of the topics that we covered today. So keep an eye out for that. Let me know in the chat if you're interested in that. We do have a merch store. I'm not wearing any merch today, but we do have a merch store. So if you want to help support your favorite, it's not a bug, it's a feature. Or if you want to maybe use your or get a Jira Life t-shirt, we do have a merch store. Subscribe to this channel. If you haven't already, please do hit that subscribe button. Again, this channel, we're trying to grow it. So if you're made it this far and you haven't made it to the end, I mean, if you haven't subscribed and you are at the end, make sure you do that. And then in the future, I am going to be doing some instructor-led courses. So if you're interested in doing more of a one-on-one, let me know, and more information will be coming. So do follow me on LinkedIn, though, so that you can be on top of all the news. And yeah, thank you all very much for being here. Appreciate you taking the time out of your day. Hopefully you learned something. Yeah, thank you so much. We'll see you in another live stream. Make sure you come back in a week or two. That Jira Advanced Roadmaps, you don't want to miss that one out. So thanks. Bye.